Slavery, a dark chapter in human history, thrived on forced labor. It enriched some while dehumanizing millions. Though abolished, its legacy continues to haunt us. Today, a new form of slavery persists: forced prison labor.
Red Onion State Prison is a place where time stands still.
Located in the heart of Appalachia, Red Onion State Prison was built to house the worst of the worst.
The reality is that over 2/3 of the inmates are in solitary confinement, and they are isolated for 23 hours a day.
With limited access to education, work, or even human contact, it's a life stripped of hope. Inmates have protested these brutal conditions, even resorting to hunger strikes and, more recently, self-immolation. Reports of racism, brutality, and inhumane treatment have cast a dark shadow over this facility. Is this really justice?
Join us as we uncover the untold stories of Red Onion State Prison.
One of the darkest periods in human history has evolved into modern business practices.
The barbaric and inhumane practice of slavery is still seen today. It has become the prison industrial system.
First up, we have minimum security prisons. These are like the easygoing cousins of the prison world. Think dormitory-style housing and a lot more freedom of movement. Inmates here are usually non-violent offenders.
Next, we have minimum security prisons. Now things get a bit more serious. Inmates live in cells and there are more restrictions, but they still get some activities and programs to join.
Moving on to maximum security prisons. These are for the big league offenders. High walls, barbed wire, and lots of guards. Inmates are often in their cells for 23 hours a day.
And finally, the Supermax. This is the top of the line in terms of security. Inmates here are considered the most dangerous and are kept in solitary confinement almost all the time. From minimum to Supermax, the American prison system is designed to match the security level to the inmate.
Public prisons are run by the government, funded by taxpayer dollars. Private prisons, they're run by private companies aiming to make a profit. Here's a stat for you. About 8% of the US prison population is in private prisons. That's nearly 115,000 people. Public prisons focus on rehabilitation and reducing reoffense rates. Think education programs and job training. Private prisons, on the other hand, often cut costs wherever they can. This can lead to fewer services and lower staffing levels. Real-world example. In Mississippi, a lawsuit showed private prisons had higher violence rates compared to public ones. Yikes! So what's the takeaway? Public prisons aim to serve the public good, while private prisons prioritize profit. Both have their pros and cons, but it's crucial to know the differences.
At Virginia's notorious Red Onion State Prison, inmates are resorting to self-inflicted burns to protest inhumane conditions, including prolonged solitary confinement, racial abuse, and medical neglect.
Despite officials' denials of self-immolation, the desperation of these men underscores the urgent need to confront systematic brutality within our prison system.
6 incidents have been confirmed by the Virginia Department of Corrections, but some reports suggest up to 12 men have been injured. Why would anyone go to such lengths? It's a desperate cry for help.
Red Onion State Prison is located in Wise County. It's a supermax prison that houses several hundred inmates. In a statement posted this week on social media, the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus said it was horrified at recent reports of incarcerated individuals setting themselves on fire in response to the degrading and inhumane conditions. Allegations include physical abuse, medical neglect, excessive solitary confinement, and dog attacks. In an interview with WDBJ-7, Western Regional Operations Chief Gregory Holloway acknowledged that inmates had burned themselves, but said they had used an improvised device to manipulate the electrical outlets in their cells.
To be clear, these inmates did not set themselves on fire, as some reports have suggested. 6 was the total. They were treated at our medical secure ward at MCV. Um, Several of them did not need to go off site, just a few of them, and they eventually returned to the facility.
In a written statement, Corrections Director Chad Dotson said the department has invited all legislators to visit Red Onion, to observe the facility and speak with inmates and staff. The recent round of stories about Red Onion are nothing more than bad faith efforts to try to score cheap political points by advocacy groups who pursue prison abolition and policies that would make Virginians less safe, Dotson said. Roanoke Delegate Sam Rasool is a member of the VLBC and chair of the House subcommittee that oversees corrections.
What we see is that there's a culture that needs to continue to evolve where the constitutional responsibility to be treating people humanely, and we've seen time and time again where we've struggled with that. So we need to continue to make improvements. We have made some, but we were just so far behind. We've got a lot more work to do.
The Virginia Legislative Black Caucus and the American Civil Liberties Union are calling on state officials, including a new watchdog within the Corrections Department, to investigate and take action.
We just want to make sure that we're clear to the public.
Virginia Department of Correction leaders hoping to set the record straight after recent self-harm allegations out of Red Onion State Prison. Their message comes after the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus claimed 12 inmates at the Supermax facility set themselves on fire in response to, quote, degrading and inhumane conditions at Red Onion Prison, citing excessive stays in solitary confinement, inedible food covered in maggots and officer spit, and violent dog attacks.
So are you saying that that's not the case at the facility here at Red Onion?
Yes, that's totally not the case, Ms. Wilson.
Inmates have reported intolerable conditions. We're talking about racial and physical abuse by correctional officers, medical neglect like withheld medication, and excessive solitary confinement, sometimes up to 600 consecutive days.
I asked Department Operations Chief Gregory Holloway why they think inmates did this.
What we gather and do believe that the inmates were just manipulating to get a transfer out of the facility.
They're mainly human beings driven to extreme lengths to basically free themselves from their torment.
I'm told they used, quote, improvised devices to self-harm by tampering with electrical outlets. Caucus members are standing by their statement. Natasha White is advocating for the family of one of the inmates involved.
Who goes to that extent if it's not dire? We already know how many mysterious deaths there have been in Red Onion. Red Onion has been a problem for many, many years.
Caucus leaders are now calling on Governor Glenn Youngkin, Department Director Chadwick Dotson, Attorney General Jason Miyares, and more to take action.
Red Onion is a stain on this country, period.
There are claims of inedible food, contaminated with maggots or bodily fluids, and even violent dog attacks. One incarcerated journalist, Kevin Rashid Johnson, who reported on these incidents, found himself thrown into solitary confinement.
Kevin Rashid Johnson, who's an activist incarcerated at Red Onion, has reported on these incidents, exposing the extreme cruelty and hopelessness that defines life inside this particular prison.
Another inmate, Ekong Eshiet, stated he burned himself as a protest against racism and abuse. So, what's the official response? Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin and DOC Director Chad Dotson confirmed the incidents and an ongoing investigation. But Dotson criticized advocacy groups, suggesting their portrayal of events is politically motivated by a prison abolition agenda. Meanwhile, the Virginia Legislative Black Caucus has condemned the conditions and called for an independent investigation. You might wonder, is this new? Unfortunately, Red Onion has a long, troubling history of human rights concerns documented by Human Rights Watch over 20 years ago.
6 cases this year in 2024 at Red Onion have been self-inflicted burnings from inmates. They have been fully investigated by our Department of Corrections. And I do think that part of the investigation is to understand how they've happened and why they've happened.
We incarcerate more people than any other country, and within these prisons we subject individuals to forced labor. This raises a crucial question. Is this practice a necessary consequence of incarceration or a betrayal of our values? The 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution abolished slavery, except as punishment for a crime. This exception, a dangerous loophole, paved the way for mass incarceration and exploitation. It allowed states to profit from the labor of incarcerated individuals, many of whom are from marginalized communities. This system perpetuates racial and economic disparities, mirroring the injustices of our past.
California, a state known for its progressive values, grapples with this issue. Tens of thousands of individuals work within its prison system. These individuals produce goods and provide services for little to no pay. They work in fields, kitchens, and factories, often for less than $1 an hour. This system generates millions of dollars in revenue for the state. However, this system raises serious ethical concerns. Inmates who refuse to work face harsh punishments. They lose privileges, including family visits and access to programs. This coercion, coupled with low wages, amounts to forced labor. This practice undermines the very notion of rehabilitation, a supposed goal of the justice system. In November 2024, California voters faced a critical decision, Proposition 6. This ballot measure aimed to amend the state constitution. It sought to ban involuntary servitude in prisons, a bold step towards justice. Supported by civil rights groups, unions, and faith leaders, Proposition 6 represented a growing movement. It acknowledged the exploitation inherent in forced prison labor and called for a more humane approach. Despite widespread support, Proposition 6 failed to pass. Opponents, including some law enforcement groups, raised concerns about costs and potential impacts on prison safety. The failure of Proposition 6 highlights the complexities of this issue. It underscores the need for continued dialogue and education. The fight to end forced prison labor in California continues. Advocates are exploring alternative approaches, including legislation and legal challenges. They argue that true justice requires investing in rehabilitation, not exploitation. Programs that provide job training, education, and mental health support are crucial. These programs offer a pathway to redemption and reduce recidivism rates. By empowering individuals to rebuild their lives, we create a safer and more just society. The time has come to dismantle the vestiges of slavery in our prison system. We must demand a system that values human dignity and promotes rehabilitation. Let us work together to create a future where justice and equality prevail.
If you want to support Peace Productions, please subscribe to our Patreon. The link is on the screen.